Welcome to Revenge Report. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive in. I'm Dana Cole, and I didn't expect that night to change everything. It started at a luxury car unveiling in downtown Detroit. My stepdad, the Midwest Division 5P of Keller Motors, had me standing behind him, dressed in a suit he'd picked out for me. Not that it mattered. To him, I was just there to smile, nod, and keep my mouth shut unless he gave me permission. The tension in the room felt like a thick fog, hard to breathe through. Keller was hosting a delegation from a new Korean battery tech firm, and the licensing deal they were about to talk about could make or break us. Halfway through the pitch, the Korean CEO did something that made the whole room freeze. He switched to a southern regional dialect, one his interpreter completely froze on. It hit me right in the gut. My mom's old neighbors in Atlanta spoke the exact same way when she used to take on translation jobs. I had spent hours as a kid sitting next to her in our kitchen, listening to her practice these Southern Korean dialects from old tapes. That was how she made a living, translating for people no one else understood. I didn't even hesitate. My stepdad shot me a look, the one that said, "Don't you dare," but I ignored it. I stepped forward, cleared my throat, and started translating. The room went quiet. All eyes were on me. Scene 2. The voice. No one expected. Flashback. I was a kid, and every day after school, my mom would sit at the kitchen table with tapes and notebooks spread out, practicing Southern Korean dialects. I'd sit there, half listening, half doing homework. I remember how my stepdad would come in, shaking his head like the whole thing was beneath us. He'd scoff and make some comment about how regional stuff was backwards. When I graduated high school, he pushed me hard to go into finance and intern at Keller. But I didn't. Instead, I went to a small tech college where I could focus on international systems, taking Korean dialects on the side. I knew it wasn't what he wanted, and when I told him, he just laughed. He called it a hobby, not a career, and walked away. But I didn't care. I threw myself into those dialects, into the phonetics, knowing I was building something he didn't understand, something that would matter more than any of his corporate ladders. Scene 3. Table turner. Back at the present. The moment I finished translating, the Korean exec paused, looking at me. Then he smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile, it was a test. He spoke again, deeper this time, with more idioms, more layers. He wasn't just testing my translation skills, he was testing me, who I was. I didn't just translate, I responded with a local proverb, one I knew would land only if you were fluent, if you understood the cultural weight behind the words. The room went dead silent. He looked straight at me and said, "I'll continue the conversation with her." That was it. I wasn't sitting behind my stepdad anymore. I was sitting at the table at the front of the room with the real power. Scene 4. The real room. After the event, I was whisked into a closed-door meeting at Keller headquarters. My stepdad wasn't invited in. He hovered near the glass, but he couldn't step foot inside. Inside, there were senior execs and a project manager I didn't recognize, Nathan Briggs. The conversation quickly turned to battery specs, price points, and some numbers that sounded way above my head. But every few phrases, I picked up something hidden beneath the surface, soft, discreet notes, things that didn't align. I started offering my input. At first, Nathan looked at me like I was intruding, but as the meeting went on, he started glancing at me more. Slowly, my observations began shaping the direction of the conversation. Scene 5. The shift hours later, the Korean exec dropped a proverb about waiting on a lazy tide. It sounded poetic, but I knew better. It wasn't just a metaphor. It was a warning, a withdrawal. I leaned over to Nathan and said, "They're done. That's not a delay. It's a withdrawal." Nathan didn't hesitate. He made immediate adjustments to the company's approach, shifting the offer. The deal was hanging on by a thread, but it was still on the table. The Korean exec gave me a nod, something like respect. Nathan gave me a small, private nod, the kind you give when someone just saved the deal. Scene 6. Debrief attempt. Back at the office, I stayed late to file the meeting notes. That's when my stepdad showed up, voice low and serious. "So how'd my protege perform?" I kept it professional. The objectives were met. He pushed harder, demanding answers like I still answered to him, like I was just some tool in his big corporate play. I was about to shut it down, tell him I wasn't his protege anymore. But then Nathan walked in. Scene 7. Cut loose. Nathan walked up, looked my stepdad straight in the eye, and said, "She reports to me now. If you need information, go through the proper channels. My stepdad tried to protest, but he could see there was no backing him up. He nodded stiffly, then walked away. Nathan didn't say much, just gave me that small nod again before walking off. I stood there, alone in the hallway, and breathed. It was the first time I could breathe in years. That moment, right there, was when I stopped being his shadow. I became my own person. Scene 8. Recognition. A few weeks later, I was officially transferred to Nathan's department. He handed me a commendation letter, saying that my work had saved a seven-figure deal. At the department meeting, he let me present our communication strategy without stepping in. No corrections, no micromanagement. My stepdad emailed me 2 words: nice work. I stared at the email for a while, then deleted it. It felt lighter than I ever thought it would. Scene 9. The new room. Now I lead cross-regional communication workshops for Keller's overseas teams. I tell them what my mom always said. Language isn't just words, it's how people think. Some of them roll their eyes. Some get it. I never mention my stepdad. He's still with the company, but our paths rarely cross. I teach them to listen to the silences, to pay attention to the dialects everyone else ignores. That's where the real power lies. Scene 10. The question. Looking back, that Detroit unveiling taught me more than any class ever did. It showed me that silence can look like professionalism, but more often than not, it's fear in a suit. When I chose to speak, I didn't just save the deal. I walked out of the cage my stepdad built around me. He wanted me to mirror him. Instead, I became something else entirely. So now I'm asking you, when did you stop being someone's mirror and start following your own compass? Drop your story in the comments, because real strength shows up in moments like that, and we need to hear them. I wasn't surprised when my stepdad scoffed at the idea of me studying regional dialects. He thought it was beneath us. He had bigger plans, bigger dreams, corporate dreams. While he was climbing the ladder at Keller Motors, he looked down on anything that didn't fit into his shiny, sleek world of suits and boardrooms. I was his daughter, but he didn't really see me, at least not the way I wanted him to. When I told him I wasn't going to follow his blueprint, when I said I was enrolling in a small tech college specializing in international systems, he just stared at me like I was crazy. He pushed hard, tried to get me to study finance, pushed me to intern at Keller like a good little corporate robot. He saw it as a clear path, a path that would lead to his kind of success. Instead, I chose the harder route. I enrolled in classes that made him roll his eyes: regional dialects, phonetics, language systems. I figured it would give me the tools to understand how people really think, how they communicate without words, the way subtle shifts in tone or dialect can shift everything. That wasn't the plan he had for me. When I told him, he barely looked up from his papers, just muttered something about how regional anything was outdated. "It's a hobby, not a career," he said, like it was a fact. And then he walked away. Like that was it. But I didn't care. Not really. He was too busy to see what I was building, too focused on his climb to notice that what I was doing mattered. I buried myself in language drills. Late nights, sitting at my desk with headphones in, listening to the same tapes my mom used when she worked as a contract translator. I wasn't learning just to speak. I was learning how to feel the language, how to pick up on the things people didn't say, the things they were too afraid to voice. I remember those tapes, the crackle of them, the way my mom would pause and rewind the sections over and over again, listening to the subtle shifts in tone, the way someone from the southern part of Korea sounded compared to the northern regions. It wasn't just about translating words. It was about capturing meaning, emotion, intent. I didn't need to memorize a list of words. I needed to understand what those words meant to the people saying them. It wasn't easy. It was frustrating. Every new dialect felt like an impossible mountain. But with every drill, with every phrase, I felt like I was chipping away at something, building something he didn't understand, didn't even care about, and that made it feel even more important. There were nights I'd get off the phone with him after one of his rants about my lack of ambition and feel this tight knot in my chest. I knew I was doing the right thing, but I also knew I was doing it alone. He'd tell me he wasn't going to pay for some nonsense language hobby when there were real careers to pursue, the kind that got you in the door at Keller, the kind that had him sitting in those boardrooms, making decisions. He would push, and I would pull, but I never stopped. I knew I was doing something bigger than he could see. My friends didn't get it either. They'd ask about my classes, and I'd get the same look I'd gotten from my stepdad. The why bother look. But I didn't care. They didn't have to get it. I was the one in the weeds, buried in Korean dialects, in a world that was starting to feel like the one where real power existed. not in some glossy corporate pitch, but in the spaces between the words. And while everyone else was focused on climbing corporate ladders, climbing social status, climbing some idea of success, I was digging in the dirt, learning to understand the things people said when they thought no one was listening. I finished translating, and the room was dead silent. I could feel the weight of everyone's gaze, like 100 eyes were drilling into my back. The air felt thick, and for a second, I was sure my heart was beating louder than the entire room. But I couldn't back down now. The Korean exec leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a slow, deliberate smile. I wasn't sure if it was approval or a challenge, but I knew that look. It was a test. Without missing a beat, he switched gears, lowering his voice, and spoke again. The tone was deeper this time, more idiomatic, layered with expressions that only someone truly familiar with the regional dialect would understand. He was checking to see if I could follow him. I didn't hesitate. My mind clicked into gear and I responded, not with a simple translation, but with an equally rich local proverb, something that would catch him off guard, something that would show him I wasn't just parroting words. I was listening to what he was really saying. The room seemed to freeze. There was this thick, suffocating silence. Everyone around the table was waiting for someone to speak, but no one did. I could feel my stepdad's eyes burning into the back of my neck, his jaw clenched tight. He was probably wondering how I knew that particular phrase, why I knew it. The Korean exec didn't flinch. He just looked straight at me, his eyes narrowing with a certain respect I didn't expect. Then, in a calm voice, he said, "I'll continue the conversation with her." My stomach dropped, and for a second, I couldn't breathe. The moment felt like it had stretched out forever, but it was only a few seconds. My stepdad stiffened beside me, his body language going from proud to tense. He was losing control in front of his peers. They were all staring, but now I was the one in charge of the conversation. I didn't wait. I moved to the other side of the table and took a seat, not behind it, but at it, right there, in the middle of the conversation. The weight of it was heavy, but the power felt like it belonged to me now. My stepdad remained standing. He didn't speak, but I could tell he was furious. There was a flicker of disbelief in his eyes, like he couldn't quite grasp what had just happened. I could almost feel him pulling himself back together, trying to regain his footing, trying to act like the corporate leader he thought he was. But it was too late. I wasn't just his daughter anymore. I was something else now, something more than he'd ever expected. The Korean exec leaned forward, and I followed his lead. He spoke again, his words slower now, as if measuring each one. I translated, yes, but I also responded. I didn't just relay what he said, I understood it, felt it, and spoke back with the same weight. I could feel my stepdad's eyes on me. He wasn't happy, I could tell. But this time, it didn't matter. I wasn't doing this for him. I wasn't sitting in the background anymore, playing by his rules. This was my moment. And I wasn't about to let him or anyone else take that from me. The rest of the meeting felt different. The dynamic had shifted. I didn't just understand the language. I understood the power of what was being said. And for the first time, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. After the event, they whisked me away to a closed-door meeting at Keller headquarters. The air inside the conference room was sterile, too polished, too perfect. There were senior execs sitting around the table, all sharp suits and tight smiles, and a project manager I didn't recognize, Nathan Briggs. He stood at the head of the table, flipping through a pile of documents like he didn't even know I was in the room. My stepdad wasn't invited in. I didn't know if he was still pissed off or just waiting to see how it all played out, but I saw him through the glass window, standing just outside the door, arms crossed tight across his chest. He couldn't come in, couldn't be part of this anymore. He was out. I sat at the far end of the table, trying to calm my nerves. I wasn't sure what this meeting was about, but I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Not with the way the Korean delegation had been acting, and not with the way my stepdad was lingering outside. It wasn't his world anymore. They started going over the battery specs, pricing points, potential markets. A lot of numbers I didn't fully understand at first, technical stuff, corporate jargon, but something about the way they spoke kept catching my ear. There was this subtext, this undercurrent, that I couldn't ignore. Small shifts in tone, in how the terms were framed. It was like they were talking in code. As they kept talking, I started scribbling notes on my pad, little things I noticed, things that didn't sit right. I wasn't trying to interrupt, I just felt like I had something to offer, something the others weren't hearing. Nathan noticed first. He gave me this quick, sharp glance, clearly annoyed, as if he wasn't sure why I was there in the first place. He kept his focus on the others, but I could tell I had his attention now. I leaned forward just slightly, keeping my voice low, offering a few subtle observations that didn't seem to fit with what was being said. Phrases about market behavior, cultural trends in their region, things like that. At first, Nathan didn't respond. He just kept talking, ignoring me, like I was an afterthought. But then, maybe it was the way I phrased something, or maybe he was just realizing I knew what I was talking about, he glanced at me again, this time with a little less annoyance and a little more curiosity. His eyes flicked between me and the others. Then he went back to the conversation, but his tone changed just a bit. And then he started to pay more attention to what I said. He'd ask me questions, softly at first. I'd offer my take, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tone of the whole meeting shifted. Where there had been tension before, there was now a kind of quiet understanding between me and Nathan. I didn't need to prove anything. I just needed to speak the truth as I saw it, and that seemed to change how the others were responding. They were listening now, really listening. I could feel my stepdad, still standing outside, watching through that glass. His presence, even though he wasn't part of the meeting, was like a weight pressing down on me. But the more Nathan took my input seriously, the more it felt like I was slipping free from that weight. I wasn't just his daughter anymore. I was part of this conversation. Nathan didn't say much out loud, but the small glances he gave me told me everything. I was helping reshape this conversation. I could feel my influence growing with every word. The tension that had been in the room at the beginning was starting to ease. It wasn't all me, it couldn't have been, but I was a part of it. And I could see Nathan acknowledging that in small, almost imperceptible ways. When the meeting finally wrapped, it didn't feel like a win or a loss. It felt like something had shifted, like the dynamics had changed and I had played a part in that. And for the first time, it didn't matter if my stepdad was still out there. The meeting had ended, but the real work was just beginning. Hours later, the meeting dragged on. The air felt thick, like a storm was coming. The Korean exec, who had been silent for a while, finally leaned back in his chair and dropped a proverb on the table. "We are waiting on the lazy tide," he said, his voice calm, almost poetic. It sounded wise, cryptic, like something you'd hear in a book. But the moment the words hit the air, I felt a tight knot in my stomach. I'd heard that phrase before, back in Atlanta. It wasn't a hopeful pause, it was a warning, a withdrawal. They weren't just delayed. They were pulling back. I leaned in, closer to Nathan, keeping my voice low so no one else would hear. "They're done. That's not a delay. It's a withdrawal." Nathan's eyes flicked to me, his expression tight but calculating. There was no hesitation. He didn't argue. He didn't question. He just nodded once, then turned back to the table, adjusting the company's offer and approach on the spot. The tension in the room shifted. The Korean exec had expected something different. Maybe he thought we'd let it drag on, play the waiting game. But Nathan's move was sharp, direct. It was a gamble. But it was the right one. I could feel the energy in the room change, the weight of the moment hanging there, fragile and thin. Nathan's move had shifted the dynamic just enough to bring the deal back into play. Barely. The Korean exec didn't seem thrilled, but I could see a shift in his gaze. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. His eyes held something I hadn't expected: respect. It was a brief moment, but I felt it, felt that flicker of acknowledgement. It was as if he was saying, "I see you." And in that moment, I knew we weren't just negotiating a deal anymore. This was something deeper. This was about power, understanding, and timing. Nathan didn't say anything, but he gave me a small nod. Private, just between us. A nod that said everything I needed to hear. "You just saved this thing." I felt my chest tighten with a mix of pride and relief. It wasn't just about the deal anymore. It was about finally being seen for what I'd known all along, that I could read the room, hear the unspoken, and make a difference. The Korean exec shifted in his chair, folding his hands on the table. He didn't smile, but the way he held himself had changed. There was no more waiting on a lazy tide. It was back on the table, the offer still fragile, but alive. I sat back in my chair, the weight of the meeting settling in. I had spoken up, I had listened, and for once, it wasn't just my stepdad at the center of the action. This was mine, and the whole room knew it. Back at the office, the place was quiet, except for the sound of my keyboard tapping as I filed the meeting notes. The clock on the wall showed it was well past hours, but I wasn't in a hurry to leave. I was still riding the adrenaline from the meeting, but there was this heavy feeling in my gut too. Like I'd made a move, taken a stand, and now I was waiting for the fallout. That's when he appeared. My stepdad. The door creaked open, and I looked up to find him standing there, his voice low and deliberate. So, how'd my protege perform? He asked, leaning against the door frame like he was just popping in for a casual chat. I didn't flinch. I couldn't. He always spoke like he was the mastermind, like he'd placed me there to play a part in his plan. It was his usual move, his attempt to take credit for everything I did. I'd heard it a million times before. His protege, like I wasn't even a person, just a tool he could use to climb higher. I kept it professional, my tone flat, no emotion creeping into it. The objectives were met. He raised an eyebrow, the way he always did when he didn't get the response he was looking for. It wasn't enough. He pushed harder, taking a step forward as if he could bully me into giving him more. Details, he demanded, his voice sharp now, like he still had control over me, like I was still reporting to him. I felt my blood pressure rise, a familiar knot of frustration tightening in my chest. I was about to shut it down right there, tell him to back off, that I didn't owe him anything. I could feel the words on the tip of my tongue, ready to tell him that I didn't need his approval anymore. But just as I opened my mouth to respond, the door swung open, and Nathan stepped in. He glanced at my stepdad, then at me, like he knew exactly what was going on. Without missing a beat, Nathan straightened up and walked into the room, his presence filling the space in an instant. His voice was cool, clear, and it cut through the tension like a knife. "She reports to me now," Nathan said, his gaze flicking to my stepdad for a brief moment. "If you need anything from her, you'll go through the proper channels." My stepdad froze. For a second, it was like he couldn't process the words. He stood there, mouth open, his control slipping right through his fingers. He tried to muster something, a protest maybe, but Nathan didn't even give him a chance. Nathan didn't offer anything else. No explanations, no justification. He didn't need to. He just stood there, waiting for my stepdad to make the decision, as if to say, "This is how it is now." My stepdad's face went red, but all he could do was nod, stiff and tight, and walk out. The door shut behind him with a soft click, and the tension that had been hanging in the air evaporated. Nathan didn't say anything else, but he gave me a small nod. The kind you give when someone's just done something they should have done a long time ago. No congratulations, no praise, just acknowledgement. I stood there, watching him walk out, and finally, I could breathe again. The weight of it all, the frustration, the tension, it was gone. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't his shadow. I wasn't anyone's shadow. And that felt like freedom. Nathan's words hung in the air like a hammer striking an anvil. "She reports to me now. If you need information, go through proper channels." I couldn't look at my stepdad, but I could feel his fury radiating off him. He stood there, frozen for a moment, like he didn't know what to do with himself. He was used to being the one in control, the one making the calls, but not anymore. He opened his mouth to protest, maybe to argue, but the words never left his lips. He looked around, saw no one backing him, saw no way to get out of this gracefully. Slowly, his face went redder than I'd ever seen it, and all he could do was nod. Stiff, tight, almost mechanical. The kind of nod you give when you've been defeated but are too proud to admit it. Without saying another word, he turned and walked out of the room, the door closing behind him with a dull thud that felt like it echoed in my chest. I didn't feel relief yet. It wasn't that simple, but it was something. Nathan didn't say anything either. He just looked at me, and for a second, his eyes held that same understanding they had in the meeting, sharp, direct, and just the right amount of weight. Then, without a word, he gave me a small nod, like it was all settled, like the last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. And just like that, he walked off. I stood there, alone in the hallway, the silence settling in around me. My chest was tight, like I couldn't quite catch my breath, but the air felt different now, lighter. I leaned against the wall for a second, letting the weight of it all sink in. My stepdad was gone. His power, his control, it was all out of my hands now. It wasn't just his game anymore. It wasn't just his path. I wasn't some puppet in his play anymore, and I wasn't hiding behind him. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to apologize for making my own choices. For the first time, I wasn't standing in someone else's shadow. It was a strange feeling, almost like I'd been holding my breath for years, and now I could finally exhale. I stood there for a few more moments, letting the quiet wash over me. And that was it. That was the moment. The moment I stopped being his shadow. The moment I became my own person. It wasn't a loud declaration. There were no fireworks or applause. It was just this quiet, solid truth. I was free. A few weeks passed, and things started to settle into this new rhythm. I was officially transferred to Nathan's department, a move that felt like a full, hard exhale. The whole shift was subtle in some ways, loud in others. My stepdad had his own corner to brood in, and I had mine. But I wasn't worried about that anymore. I was in charge of my own lane now. One afternoon, Nathan called me into his office. The door clicked shut behind me, and for a second, I wondered if I'd messed something up. But then he handed me a letter, a simple piece of paper folded neatly in half. It was a commendation letter. "Your work saved a seven-figure deal," he said, his voice calm, but the weight behind the words was unmistakable. I blinked, not sure what to say. This wasn't the kind of recognition I was used to. It wasn't from a company email or some half-hearted thanks thrown my way. This was real. Acknowledgement of something I had done, alone, that had made a difference. The letter felt heavy in my hand, like it was a key, opening doors I had no idea I could even reach. I had thought the moment would feel like fireworks, like a big celebratory thing. But it didn't. It was quiet and strangely personal. Nathan let me hold the letter for a moment, just long enough for me to realize that something had really shifted. Something inside me had changed. At the next department meeting, Nathan gave me the floor. I was going to present our new communication strategy. Just like that. No hand-holding, no corrections. I was on my own, completely. And I did it. I stood up in front of everyone, spoke clearly, confidently, just the way I had imagined it in my head during those long nights practicing. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I knew my stuff. The room was silent while I spoke, but the silence felt different. It wasn't judgment. It wasn't skepticism. It was attention. When I finished, Nathan didn't offer praise. He just gave me that nod again, the same one he had given me when I helped steer the deal back on course. The kind of nod that said, "You've got this." And that was enough. Later that day, I opened my email. There it was, a message from my stepdad, with just 2 words. "Nice work." I stared at it. For a long time. My mind replayed everything that had led up to that moment. All the tension, all the pushing, all the expectations. He had never seen me for what I really was, not the way Nathan had. But even still, I read those 2 words, and there was something hollow about them, like they didn't mean anything coming from him anymore. I deleted the email. There was no point in holding on to something that didn't matter. And in that moment, as the email disappeared into the void, I felt lighter than I ever had before, like I had just cut loose from a weight I'd been carrying my whole life. No more validation from him. No more pretending. I didn't need it. That was the moment. The moment I knew I was walking my own path now, and no one could take that away. Now, I lead the cross-regional communication workshops for Keller's overseas teams. It feels like I'm in a completely different world than I was a year ago. I'm the one standing in front of the room, talking about the nuances of language, the way it shapes culture, the way it shapes business. I teach new hires how to read people, not just what they say, but how they say it, and more importantly, what they don't say. I always start with the same thing, something my mom taught me when I was a kid. Language isn't just words, it's how people think. Some of them roll their eyes, of course. They think it's some kind of motivational speech, like I'm trying to inspire them with fluff. But some of them, only a few, actually get it. They understand that the power isn't just in the translation. It's in the silence between the words. The pauses, the hesitations, the shifts in tone that tell you more than 1,000 perfectly translated sentences. That's where the real power sits. I talk about dialects too, how they carry meaning beyond just the vocabulary, how someone's accent, the way they emphasize certain syllables, can tell you where they're really coming from, even when their words don't match. People forget about that. They hear foreign and think it's all the same, but it's not. The regional dialects are where the subtleties hide, where the unspoken truths are buried. In the back of my mind, I can hear my stepdad's voice, the way he would scoff at anything regional. It used to make my skin crawl. He never understood that language wasn't just a tool, it was a way of seeing the world. And that made him uncomfortable. I'm not sure he'd ever admit it, but I know it was because he couldn't control it. He couldn't put it in a box. I don't mention him in these workshops. Not once. He's still with the company, I'm sure of it. But our paths rarely cross, and when they do, it's like passing strangers in a hallway. He doesn't acknowledge me, and I don't acknowledge him. It's almost like I don't exist in the way I used to, the way he used to want me to. The difference is, now I'm doing the work that matters, the work that makes an impact. I've got a team to lead, people who respect what I do, who listen when I speak. And when I tell them to pay attention to the silences, to the dialects everyone else ignores, I know they're hearing me. Because the power isn't in the words, it's in how you understand them. And no one taught me that better than my mom. I stand in front of the room, looking at their faces, and I don't need to prove anything. Not to them, not to him. I know what I'm doing here. And I know deep down that the moment I let go of trying to get his approval was the moment I truly stepped into my own. Looking back, that Detroit unveiling taught me more than any class ever did. It wasn't about the car, or the deal, or the fancy conference room. It was about the silence. The kind that looked like professionalism but was really just fear in a suit. Everyone in that room was holding their breath, waiting for someone else to make a move. But when I chose to speak up, when I interrupted everything and translated, I didn't just save the deal. I walked out of the cage my stepdad had built around me. For so long, I thought I had to echo him, his words, his way, his plan. I thought I was meant to follow in his footsteps, to be his perfect reflection. But in that moment, I realized I wasn't just his mirror. I could be something else entirely. I could carve my own path. And the minute I did, everything changed. He never saw me for who I was. He never could. And that was the real freedom. I stopped trying to live up to his expectations. I started listening to my own instincts. And once I did that, it was like the world opened up. So now I'm asking you, when did you stop being someone's mirror and start following your own compass? When did you stop trying to live up to someone else's image and start defining your own? Drop your story in the comments. I want to hear it. Because real strength doesn't always show up in the big moments. Sometimes it's the quiet ones, the moments when you step out of someone else's shadow and finally stand in your own light. That's where the real power is.